is evil everywhere. Unknown to most humans, the world is ruled and directed by supernatural forces beyond their comprehension.
Run! Run! Run from me!
Hunter the Reckoning released in 2002 for the Xbox and GameCube, a top-down action game based on the Hunter the Reckoning tabletop RPG. A good way to describe this game would be to say it's both a more simplified and a more complex take on the Gauntlet dungeon crawlers such as Legends and Dark Legacy. Up to 4 people can play at a time, you all share the same screen, there are multiple characters to select that have their own stats and strengths, you level up as you progress in the game, you fight hordes of respawning enemies in a variety of environments, you have access to an infinite range weapon in addition to melee, and there are even a few item pickups you can find as well. It's more simplified due to the fewer secrets, traps, puzzles, characters, and items, but more complex in the way that it has more depth to the melee combat and boss battles, features a mana system with a few unique powers, and it has a better story and lore to go along with it. The latter is likely due to the plethora of material high-voltage software had at their disposal, given that this is essentially a licensed game, but with a far more robust backstory. The game is overall a ton of fun, both playing alone or with a friend or two, but it does have its share of problems, and some of them are hard to ignore. The game begins in Ashcroft Penitentiary, where Nathaniel Arcady, a serial killer, is set to be executed. As the switch is thrown, vengeful spirits escape the prison to occupy the bodies of the living, turning them into zombies more or less. Due to becoming imbued, aka ordinary humans who have awakened to the presence of supernatural monsters, our 4 main protagonists, and a few others called bystanders, are the only ones who are able to see these evil entities for what they truly are. This almost implies that everyone else just sees us as bloodthirsty murderers, and some of the innocent's dialogue when you rescue them later on hints at this as well. Kinda messed up. Our hunters fight off the monsters, eventually boarding up the prison and locking the spirits away. 1 year later, a rave takes place, a morbid anniversary of sorts, which beckons the evil once more, but this time they take over the entire city. Our group of 4, or 1 if you play alone, resolve to come back to finish what they started, hunting down the supernatural. There's more to it than that, especially if you research what some of this stuff means in the pen and paper game, but that's basically all you need to know for now. The main thing you'll be doing in Hunter the Reckoning is shooting and slashing at hordes of enemies, either with your trusty character-specific weapons, or the special weapon pickups you'll grab throughout. The ones you'll see most often are machine guns and shotguns, both of which seem to upgrade at certain stages of the game. Your stats have nothing to do with it, eventually you'll just grab a better variation, and that's what you'll have from now on. The shotgun specifically gets a tremendous makeover, starting with a double barrel in the beginning, which is meh, and eventually advancing to the combat shotgun, which makes certain enemy and boss encounters so much easier. You'll also find a chainsaw, flamethrower, and rocket launcher. Because all of these have a finite amount of ammo, it's not always smart to use them. It becomes increasingly beneficial to save them for boss fights, or for specific rooms where tougher enemies clump together. Thankfully, the game doesn't expect you to completely rely on your weaker weapons for non-climactic encounters, as even on Nightmare mode in single player, there were plenty of times I reached my ammo count and couldn't grab any more. Due to the poor hitboxes and wonky animations, which I'll talk about later, the chainsaw isn't really as useful as I'd like it to be. I was hoping I could just hold it out and walk into people, but you have to use the slash combo, which isn't always worth it. Both the chainsaw and flamethrower have a gas meter at the top, which makes them feel a little more unique. They don't share their tanks or anything, you wouldn't be able to pick up a flamethrower and use its fuel for the chainsaw, it's just neat that they have a gauge at the top instead of an ammo count. The rocket launcher is insanity. It doesn't abide by the rules of the friendly fire setting, it's an explosive which will blow you or your teammates up if too close. The number of lives my friend and I lost thanks to the rocket launcher likely crossed the double digits, and then some. Every time we were desperate though, I exclaimed, "Hang on, trust me, I got this, I can do it this time." Then splat goes my hunter. With certain boss fights it becomes very useful, but given how touchy it is to fire, and the deceiving blast radius, it's almost always a risk when you press the fire button. Pressing the fire button is something you'll often be doing, as the infinite ammo character-specific guns require a trigger press for every single shot, except Martyr, who shoots twice with one press. If you play through the whole game in one sitting, like me and my buddy did, your finger may get awfully tired close to the end. It's worth it though, as it helps the ranged weaponry feel that much more satisfying to use. I had just played Insect Armageddon before Hunter the Reckoning, and it was nearly a night and day difference. The controller rumble is on point, but even without the vibration, the visual and audio design convey every single pull of the trigger perfectly. A gunshot is accompanied by a burst of light coming from the barrel of the gun, and a soft flicker on the ground surrounding the character. The sounds for all of the weapons pack a punch, but considering that you may be hearing these gunshots 1,000+ times or so, the constant cadence and rhythm of your gunfire starts to wear thin after a while. Even better than all that though, the enemies visibly react to being shot, and the regular zombies even lose chunks of their body as they take damage, a really cool detail. Once they start getting handguns and shotguns, that basically goes away entirely, which kind of sucks, since it can sometimes be hard to discern if you've hit them from far away. Thankfully, the blood spatter is still present, and the stains left on the ground or walls are a really nice touch. One aspect of the shooting that leaves a lot to be desired is the twin-stick aiming. I am very comfortable with twin-stick shooters, but it was pretty clear early on that this wasn't as freeform as I'd like. You can basically only aim in 4 directions when there's nothing else in range, but once something is, almost the entirety of that direction on the right thumbstick will now auto-aim at the new threat. When it's a single hostile, it works just fine, but the moment there's more than one target in range, things start to go haywire, and I didn't just say target that time because I fancy using synonyms as I write scripts. There are certain things in the environment that are treated with the same level of importance as an enemy, such as windows, mannequins, benches, tables, and so much more. The skeletons that you need to press the A button to activate for an objective? Yep, those have just as high of a priority as the zombies close by that can actually kill you. I feel like this is either a case of mixed up priorities on behalf of the design team, or some issue with the programming. It is pretty neat that you can break objects in your immediate surroundings. That wasn't something super common back in the day. Glass shattering because you fired at it? That's awesome. How about we fudge the player's aim a bit so they're more likely to hit the window in a tense encounter? That way we'll know for sure our work on these breakables won't go unnoticed. I'm sure it's obvious, but any scenario where you have to fight with the game for it to do what you want isn't ideal, and especially not with something as foundational as aiming at the enemy. There's a part of me that thinks this wasn't a creative decision, however, since the game does encourage a player to shoot the explosive cars to kill enemies around them, but the targeting system battles you every step of the way. It hyper-focuses on the zombies this time, which feels completely backwards to how it goes for the rest of the environmental breakables. This is the time you'd expect the game to fudge the auto-lock, to get the player to see the cool explosion, but it rarely works if there are any enemies nearby. The most hilarious way this auto-lock problem takes the spotlight is with the friendly fire setting. My friend and I played the whole game through with it turned off completely. Many times we would stand side by side, mowing down the threats from a safe distance, sometimes off-screen given how poor the camera works in some sections. The rocket launcher proves to be a nuisance, like I've already shown, but that was the extent of it. Well, afterwards we gave the first level a go, with friendly fire on, and good lord almighty, the game heavily prioritizes your allies. It's one thing for them to be options you can aim at, but because they're almost always going to be the closest target near you, it will default to them without hesitation. Truly, I don't think you could beat this game with 4 players and this setting turned on. The camera was already kind of a hassle in boss fights with 2 people, since there wasn't much space to work with, but with 4 people and guns being almost off limits? No way, man, no way. It is a good laugh though, and I could easily see this being a setting you turn on to have a quasi-multiplayer match with your buds. The hitboxes on most enemies aren't the greatest, which makes melee combat feel very finicky at times. The worst offenders are the blue spirits, as you essentially pass through them as you attack, so it's tough to get the angle right. The animations for basically every attack are pretty bad, but I'd say Avengers is the most forgiving. As far as I'm concerned, he's not the best melee character because of his high strength stat, it's because his combos actually hit the enemies more often than not. His running attack is also by far the most useful, clearing out groups fairly easily. There's a diving maneuver if you press jump after 2 swings, and there's also a jumping attack, which feels terrible since you have to press it at the apex of your jump. I liked Martyrs the most, since it felt natural when jumping over boss attacks. There's also a charge-up attack, which supposedly clears out the enemies around the player, but it's absolutely atrocious. It forces you to hold down the trigger for a moment, most likely resulting in you taking damage, and its radius is so tiny it rarely clears your surroundings. It also just looks gross. The animation itself is very unsatisfying. I truly hate it. Although I was initially going to argue that certain characters were overpowered and others the opposite, After more testing, I can better see how all of them have their advantages and disadvantages, balancing out quite nicely. Avenger's swing animation is by far the best, and his strength can help with taking down groups of annoying enemies. He can make his attack stronger with his cleave edge, edge being what spells are called in this universe, and also gets a radial fire edge as well. He is incredibly slow though, and his lever action rifle wasn't something I particularly enjoyed using. Defender's katana combo isn't as good, but she starts with a healing edge right away, and her gunshots are pretty damaging, considering that her accuracy stat, which determines the damage output from guns, is the highest of the bunch. Her second edge is a circle that prevents weaker enemies from entering, but it's not that great in single player. Martyr is extremely fast, and even though she has the lowest accuracy and strength stats, she can single-handedly take down certain bosses with her quick movement speed and attack animations. Her main edges are buffs, one grants a boost to her speed and melee damage, and the other reflects damage back to the enemy. The former costs conviction like usual, conviction being the word for mana in this universe, but it also takes some of your health as well, which is a pretty big trade-off. Judge feels very middle of the road. His melee attacks aren't as weak as Martyr's, but they aren't as strong as Avenger's, and his swing, in my opinion, is the worst of the bunch. At least with Defender, she can hit backwards on her last hit of the combo. His speed isn't as slow as Avenger, but he's still a turtle compared to Martyr, and his ranged weapon can fire 12 times before reloading, but it doesn't deal a whole lot of damage. To balance him out, he has arguably the best edge in the game, Word of Power, which can insta-kill almost every normal enemy. The problem is, it uses a ton of conviction, and the only way to get that back is the blue orbs or specific orange glyphs, which you won't see a whole lot during long boss fights. I've seen people online recommending to use him if you play through the game alone, since his wooden crossbow bolts help against the vampires near the end, but I don't know about that. I went all the way through with Defender on Nightmare difficulty pretty casually, and Martyr can essentially run past everything, then tear bosses to shreds. If I had to choose, I'd say Judge feels the worst in single player, since his edges are where he shines, but you don't always have access to conviction replenishment, and it's entirely too easy to miss when firing Word of Power. Again, in a group setting, he feels fine, since you can prioritize the conviction glyphs for him and use his edges to clear groups or tougher enemies, but when alone, he feels pretty bad. Maybe if his melee was a bit stronger, his swing animation a bit larger, and if he was even a little bit quicker. The red and blue orbs obviously give back some health and conviction respectively, but they disappear really quickly. This definitely encourages a player to be up close and personal, which pairs well with Avenger, but Martyr can also run in and swipe them as well since she's so fast. If you try the same thing as Judge or Defender, you'll likely get hit by a newly respawning enemy. Defender has a healing edge, so it isn't horrible for her, but for Judge, man, it just seems like he can't catch a break. One thing in particular that I found myself enjoying the more I played was how different these four characters are. All of them have different melee weapons: battle axe, katana, twin daggers, and crusader sword. All of them have distinct ranged weapons: lever action rifle, magnum revolver, dual pistols, and crossbow, and their number of shots before reloading is even unique: 8, 6, 20, and 12. They all start with specific stats, have mostly their own edges, and even have their own separate voice lines for the same scene, which helps to show off their individual personality.
You've got nerve. I can't believe you actually expect me to feel sorry for you. Save the crybaby crap for someone who cares.
Nathaniel Arcady and the other prisoners suffered enough because of you. I won't let you hurt anyone else.
Can't do that. Too many of you parasites running around as it is. I'm not leaving one behind me.
You're lying. Now, maybe I didn't make myself perfectly clear. Does this jolt your memory?
The backstories of each character that the manual goes through is also interesting, even if the real game never touches on them. Either way, all of this really helps the replayability factor, since not only do you get to play the game a different way, you can hear a bit of unique dialogue as well. While the game does inform you every time your character levels up, which is often, when comparing a new character to one that's on the final level, it's pretty clear that your stats don't increase that much at all. In a way, this does keep the characters feeling separate and distinct. Judge and Avenger are still slow as shit, as they should be I guess, but it does suck some of the fun out of the progression system. Your edges do visibly get better, which is good, and you of course acquire more of them as you play, up to 3. The strangest part of this lack of progression is with a few specific enemies. There's a ton of unique monsters to fight, which is awesome, but a couple of them later in the game are unchanged from how they appeared in the first area. Even though you've supposedly leveled up your stats and thus should have more health, these guys deal more damage than before. The last third of the game is significantly more difficult than the rest, but it really doesn't feel great that your hunter feels, in a way, weaker than they did at the start. The lack of choice with the stat increases is a little deflating, and I think it specifically hurts co-op play the most. I know I would have focused on my speed stat exclusively just to shut my friend up. Yeah, you're fast, I get it, just you wait. Sadly, no, everything seems to get slightly better without your involvement, meaning there wouldn't be much separation between two different sets of 4-player parties. There is one way to have a say in your stats, and that's with the orange glyphs. There's about 4 of them sprinkled throughout the game that will improve your strength or accuracy stat instead of granting health or conviction. It gives half a skill point, which is pretty significant going off how much you'll level up without their help. I wish there were more of these, as they certainly make for a fantastic reward when finding secret areas. Even though the variety of enemies on the whole is excellent, one thing that I found to be lacking was the presentation. Not visually, I think the game looks competent overall, and every foe individually is distinct at a glance, which is good. I'm referring to how random the new monsters feel when they first show up. It's certainly cool that a couple of enemy types only get used for a room or two, such as the chained nail-throwing meat bags, the ghost doggos near the end, and the metal junk tree amalgamations? But it would have been really nice if the game had introduction cutscenes when a new type shows up, something akin to what the Suffering eventually did with its enemies. I can see the benefit of not breaking up the gameplay with an overabundance of cutscenes, but I also feel that the enemy designs are so solid that a 4-second video of them doing their thing would have set the mood a bit more. When examining them more closely, aside from their visual differences, a few of them have their own resistances and weaknesses, which is great. Gargoyles and spirits are resistant to bullets, while skitters explode on contact, thus encouraging the use of guns. Vampire types take more damage from fire and crossbow bolts, apparently. Dogs are of course complete assholes, being nearly as fast as Martyr, and the Blue Man Group spirits have hands down the funniest attack animation in the game. They do a little swing kick, which, I mean, come on. I'd say they're the most visibly morbid entity we've seen so far, considering they're hanging by their neck, but to then make them do a wee dropkick attack? It contrasts so well, it's hilarious. One of the major problems with Hunter the Reckoning, in addition to the aiming issue I mentioned earlier, is the enemy spam near the end of the game. Before then, it already felt kind of tedious if you planned on killing every hostile you came across. Since there are no definite spawners to destroy or anything, they materialize out of thin air. I don't think this is a memory limitation, since they could have easily had them appear off-screen, come from a defined physical spawning location you could destroy like in Gauntlet, or exist in the area before you arrived. One of the load screen hints says certain creatures can teleport monsters wherever they wish, or something like that, so maybe this was done to make the game more difficult? I don't know. It feels pretty cheap to get grabbed out of nowhere, and it feels even worse when the game spawns a powerful enemy and makes it attack you the moment you exit a load screen or cross through a door. This was definitely a deliberate placement, as we've tested this spot a few times, and this vampire chick is here each and every one of them. As bad as all of that feels, the main issue is the number of enemies the designers settled on for each invisible spawn point. In certain sections, the game, for some reason, keeps teleporting in new monsters, long after I grew tired of this area and this encounter. It happened so frequently, I initially wondered if the game was encouraging me to ignore them. Maybe I'm meant to run past most enemies? I don't think that's the case, however, since some doors are locked and require you to kill enough monsters for a key to drop. Maybe they wanted to get more use out of these environments, but the seemingly infinite, but very much finite enemy waves get extremely tiring after a while. There's also the entirety of the hospital roof level, which is so tedious and lengthy you can spot the chapter from afar when viewing a long play on YouTube. These gargoyles just keep coming. It was nearly a comedy routine. We killed another set, then one more would plop right down. At a certain point, more enemies don't make the levels harder or more interesting, it just pads the game's length. In this area, unlike a few others, there's no one specific monster that drops the key you need. It really wants you to clear out the entire roof. On my single-player playthrough, this meant searching the now barren rooftop until I found the one random dingus that decided not to spawn 10 minutes ago. Yeah, he had the key, sure. When in co-op, we didn't save the innocents at the end of the stage fast enough, I guess, and when too many of them died, we had to start the whole thing over. It was agony. The later levels jam so many difficult foes in one room that it almost makes no sense to play fair. We either baited the Blue Man group to enter our private room for a slaughter session, or sat back and pulled the trigger 100 times. Repeat for however many groups respawn until the key drops. When playing alone, I ran through most sections that weren't mandatory after a while, as we also began to do in certain areas. They clearly went overboard. Either they needed to cull a few levels entirely, or cut down on the constant respawning, even if only by 20%. In the beginning, not only are there fewer difficult enemies and less spam overall, the game is still new and fresh, so you're likely more willing to take it slow and methodical. It scratches that gauntlet itch of being able to dungeon crawl, essentially, and clear out every area at your own pace in the hunt for secrets and goodies. For all the hate escort missions get in video games, the cemetery level, to me, is far more worthwhile than a few of the spam stages later on. This is likely what most players will remember the most, considering Kaylee is very slow, and her screams when a spirit grabs her is about the most irritating thing in existence. However, if you don't rush things, it really isn't that bad, and you get rewarded with her teddy bear turning into a monster and slaughtering her parents. Fun times. Seriously though, if later levels felt as manageable as the cemetery does, the game would be even better than it is now. Lives, or continues, are a big part of this game, and to get more, you need to save innocence, which means running into people cowering in the corner, mostly. It's really interesting, since it definitely feels like the game was balanced around dying and continuing during difficult sections, most notably the boss fights. Playing well throughout the regular levels and then damage rushing the bosses seems to be the way to go. I feel bad for the people who played poorly enough to not have many lives when the game gets harder near the end, especially if they didn't save in a new slot every time like I did. I wonder if there are kids out there who basically had to restart from the beginning since they ran into a brick wall. Those brick walls likely being the Cornelius, Carpenter, and Arcady boss fights if I had to guess. Hey friends, real quick interruption. I say Cornelius when I should be saying Degenhart. I read the manual, I saw it say Cornelius Booth. I for some reason thought that was the warden, even though they say Degenhart throughout the whole fucking game. So you're gonna hear me say Cornelius 10 more times. Every single time I'm referencing the warden. Okay, moving on. I'm curious if this continue system was inspired by arcade cabinets of old, maybe even Gauntlet, or if it was what they settled on once they saw how easy it was to get decimated by a group of enemies, or the wonky boss attacks. I highly doubt people are casually doing no damage runs of this game, I'll just say that much, so this almost feels like a concession. If that was the case, I'd say it's implemented fairly well, providing its own level of risk versus reward. I almost can't imagine the game without it. When you're ignorant to the meta and try to play it safe with your infinite ammo guns, boss fights become a tiring ordeal, especially with how janky some of their movesets are. Every radial slam attack is deceiving as all hell, since the visuals don't match the hitbox at all. Even when you clearly jump over it, or visibly out of range, you can still get randomly smacked and keel over. It's awful. Surprisingly, single player is where I saw the AI bug out the most. They sometimes run circles around you without attacking, or when you try to kite them, hoping to bait out one of their attacks, they just keep running around. Overall, they definitely feel like ARPG boss fights, ideal for a group of players spamming attacks their way. Avoiding their strikes is much more difficult with multiple people though, since you don't always know where the limitations of the screen are, but camera issues were pretty much the standard for local co-op games back in the day, so I can't be too upset about it. For all the hoopla about Judge having ways to take out vampires, he deals a pathetic amount of damage to the only vampire boss in the game with his crossbow, and even his sword isn't that great. I don't get it, Martyr is so much better here. The most devilish thing the game has up its sleeve comes directly after the Carpenter boss fight. The boss fight itself is pretty ridiculous. He's way too fast, meaning there's really no fair way to take him down if you don't concede a bunch of continues while damage rushing him. My buddy and I did this for a while to ensure that we could get through it without losing lives. Yeah, we were basically on autopilot after 7 hours straight. His fight has a gimmick. You have to destroy this torture chair thing in the back, otherwise he regains health. Supposedly you can get rid of it right away, but it never worked if we prioritized it, and only when it activated at least once was it able to be blown up. Very confusing. The trickiest part about this isn't the fight itself, though. We aren't normally so cautious as to kite a boss for 5 minutes straight. We did this because there isn't a save point after Carpenter. After every boss fight so far, there's always been a chance to save the game, since it was the end of the level, but here you keep going, and then you have another difficult boss encounter, Arcady, now as a werewolf. In isolation, neither of the two are terribly difficult, especially when you know the metagame. For example, when on my single-player run in Nightmare mode, I beat both of them first try. I knew I had to just keep swinging and sacrifice a few of the many lives I had accrued so far. On a first playthrough though, this back-to-back boss battle is easily the most punishing moment in the game. As I said earlier, if Cornelius wasn't someone's brick wall, these two likely were for at least a few people out there. Brutal. The final boss fight is also tolerable when you know what to do, but when you don't know what to do, it's pretty terrible. It must have been awful for unperceptive players like me back in the day without a strategy guide or something. Thankfully, we have access to the internet nowadays, so after we spent 9 hours straight playing this game, we gave the boss fight a solid try on our own, then looked it up online. We had an idea of what we should be doing, since he was clearly gaining health back, but the portal obviously had something to do with it. No, you have to melee attack the boards on this window to end the fight. The cutscene does stare at it for a bit, and there is a hint that vampires hate sunlight present in the game, but that hint was half a game ago, on a very specific interactable computer in the meal hall, and in no other scenario does the game allow you to use light to harm vampires. Even more, we were just outside not 3 minutes ago, and it was pitch black. Yeah, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The Carpenter fight had a gimmick as well, but the hint for that one was placed basically right outside his arena, where the hint for the final boss, apparently, will likely be forgotten about when it matters 3 hours later. I've already talked here and there on the visuals and audio, but I was pretty impressed overall. This game looks and sounds great. The water effects may look like a thin bed sheet when outside the mansion, but in the sewers it looked believable. There's even a glow on the walls to give the impression that the light is bouncing off the water, which was a very neat consideration. Another awesome detail, we could sometimes see the ceiling reflected in the floor tiles. The character models look pretty decent, well, except for basically everyone that isn't a boss or a main character, but even still. Certainly not MGS2 levels or anything, but for a lower budget title, it's not too bad. The voice lines were all delivered really well, surprisingly so actually. I've already talked about how cool it was that every main character gets their own dialogue if they're the ones talking in the scene, but Carpenter and Cornelius's voice lines were what stole the show for me.
You killed him? You killed him? Do you have any idea what it takes to get back here? Twice? He was mine! And you stole him from me!
Made me into this thing. I didn't want it. I didn't ask for it. I had no choice!
I have nothing left to lose. Welcome to eternity.
The quality voice acting helped set the mood for the surprisingly decent story revelations. I'll be discussing heavy story spoilers from this point on, so skip here if you want to avoid it. Basically, yes, this was essentially a torture prison, which is a natural enough setting for a ghostly outbreak of evil horrors, but the why of it all was more fulfilling than I was expecting. Cornelius's family was murdered by a group of vampires that chose to embrace him, and now he's immortal, over 100 years old or so at this point. He's been feeding off the prisoners this whole time, and has tasked the doctor of the prison, Hadrian, to make him suitable vessels so he can return the souls of his family back to this realm. The only way to do this is to open the portal to the other world, which is why he's the one who threw the rave on the anniversary of Arcadie's execution to go to the spirit realm to open up once more. The first time it was by accident, this time it was on purpose. When we encounter the doctor, it's clear he's been experimenting with the supernatural as well, and right at that moment, he was working on the vessels for Cornelius. We burn them afterwards, and Cornelius then traps 3 random innocents to use for his family instead, which we can then free during the boss fight. Even though our characters are thick as hell, ignoring the many clues you find when exploring, the locations for those clues feels pretty believable. We find the gravestones of his family outside his mansion, which include the dates. We see the drafts for the rave flyer on his computer. We see the 3 bodies Hadrian was working on. We know Cornelius is a vampire. It's all paced pretty well, I think, but it would have been a bit better if the game didn't have expository cutscenes basically explaining it word for word. Carpenter, otherwise known as Basil Exposition, apparently was an inmate in the prison for 2 years, however long ago, and it appears that he's returned to get revenge on Hadrian, so he tricks the main characters, making them do his bidding like a pawn in a game of chess. That's what a guide told me anyway, but I don't really buy it. The characters certainly react as if Carpenter has been duping them the whole time, but I can't think of a single thing he did that didn't also align with their goals. They came back to hunt down this evil, right? To take out whatever was responsible? Well, he got them into the prison, he gave them the lowdown on everything that's happening, and how to stop it. He even had Kaylee initially, potentially even protecting her, and then gave her over to you so you could reunite her with her parents. Her parents are now dead in a vicious bear attack, but still.
That's right. Don't take no shit from anybody's stuffed animal.
He's certainly snarky, sure, but beyond just looking like a bad guy, I don't understand why all of our protagonists disregard him so quickly, and a couple of them even call him a rot, which is clearly a disparaging term for the monsters we've seen so far. As much as I love his line where he calls the four hunters out on their prejudices, him leading with it as his first piece of dialogue is a bit out of place. Maybe save that for the second meeting, where he's clearly proven himself to be helpful. Our final encounter with him is of course his boss fight, but he actually comes across as kind of stupid here. He does manage to understand our character even though they don't explicitly say they killed Hadrian, so he's smart in that regard, but his reaction and overall lack of a plan is a bit silly. I'm assuming he was the one who had to kill Hadrian for his soul to be set free or something, since he's confused as to why he's still here even though Hadrian is dead. He then gets enraged that we're the ones who killed the doctor, and vows to kill us next. I mean, my guy, if you didn't want us to kill Hadrian, just tell us, you know? I realize Cornelius tricked us, tricked our dumb characters into thinking Arcady was the one responsible for all of this, which is why we went back into the prison in the first place, but my guy, appear out of nowhere like you've done before, tell us not to kill Hadrian, and we wouldn't have. Oh well. It's interesting how much information we're given from both him and Arcady, since I'm not sure either could be considered trustworthy. Arcady does sound like he genuinely wants you to stop Cornelius, and it was obvious that the warden was the one behind it. I mean, come on now, we already found the rave flyer on his home computer, but we also just nearly killed Arcady, so he could be saying anything for us to leave him alone at that point. Him chasing you down is kind of repetitive, but at least the game throws in some unique ghost dog enemies at you while you get back to the mansion. Our characters apparently didn't actually kill Cornelius before in that difficult mansion boss fight. He, well, I don't know, played dead, I guess? But now we kill him for realsies in the final boss fight. Afterwards, the ending cutscene is determined by how many people you've saved. At the beginning of the game, the train car you came in on broke down, and is apparently the only way out of town. The conductor can fix it, but says he'll need 50 people to help him. It's also been said, by a supposedly trustworthy source, I guess, that anyone not 20 miles out of town will die instantly the moment the hole closes, both humans and rot alike. This is why the train car is necessary, and is why 50 people are what determines which ending you get. Okay, if you've saved 50 or more people, the train is fixed, and all of the civilians you saved get to escape the city. The good ending. I doubt many people saw the bad ending, since saving 50 innocents is very easy to do, and is almost necessary if you want enough lives for the difficult boss encounters. But either way, the train conductor just dies as you get back, the end. Feels very rushed, and in both endings, the hunters seem immune to the instant death dealio, but who cares? More interesting is the absence of any explanation about the messengers. They're the ones leaving you notes around town, contextualized as an early internet message board, it looks like. It's a fun way to give hints to the player, but the first prompt says it's from Bookworm 55, and they say Witness 1 asked them to help us get through this alive. These are actually characters from the pen and paper Hunter the Reckoning game, but beyond the HunterNet updates, we don't get any other interactions with them. Kind of strange, but I almost wonder if this was deliberate, to maybe encourage a player to buy one of the books that are advertised at the back of the manual to learn more. Either way, not a big deal, but it would have been nice to get a bit more closure out of the good ending. Our character walking into the sunlit window doesn't really do much for me. Hunter the Reckoning is an extremely enjoyable gauntlet-like type of game that suffers from a few nagging issues. The hitboxes, and melee combat almost as a whole, are finicky at best, the auto-aiming priorities seem out of whack, the enemies are far too plentiful at times, especially near the end of the game, and the RPG leveling system seems almost superfluous given how inconsequential it really is. The story, however, is far better than I expected, the audio and visual design are pretty decent, even if most of the levels are a gray blur when looking back, The environmental and enemy designs offer a lot of variety, and the core gameplay is just fun. The arcade magic is there, slaying hordes of enemies while you progress through levels, grabbing consumable items, finding the few scattered secrets, defeating bosses, testing out different characters. It's great. I never played this as a kid, but I bet I would have loved it. It's a really fun time even as an adult, and considering that I hold no nostalgia for this game, you can take my word on that. I wasn't before, but now that I've played it all the way through a few times, I'm genuinely looking forward to the 2 sequels, Wayward and Redeemer. I don't know when I'll get to them, but considering the level of enjoyment I got from Hunter the Reckoning, it surely won't be more than a year, right? Right? Thanks for watching, friends. Sign up to the Patreon for early access to videos and to overall support the channel in a monetary fashion. This is another game that was recommended by someone in the comments, so don't think I don't read those. They do influence my decisions, even if only slightly. We'll see what comes out next, but it'll likely be something with the word dead in the title. Alright, I'll see you then. Have a good one.
Oh, go away! Leave